Thank you for tuning in to the Afternoon Pint podcast. Our show will start right after these messages from our sponsors.
Hey, Matt. We're thinking of selling our home and finding a bigger place.
Oh, really? I thought you guys loved where you lived.
Oh, we do. Our family is just growing. With pets. A dog, a cat, 2 guinea pigs, a hamster.
And you're planning on getting more?
Maybe a goat or a crocodile.
Well, I have the person for you. Kimmy Najad is an experienced real estate agent who prides herself in finding the perfect home for her clients.
We're just browsing now. I'm not sure if we really need a realtor yet.
Yeah, no worries. Kimmy can help you with the comparative market analysis to help you determine the value of your home if you're planning on selling, or help you determine the going rate for the neighborhood you're moving into. She can also work at your pace.
Awesome. All right, I'll give her a shot. What's her phone number?
On Facebook, Kimmy Najad, Exit Realty Metro. Her phone number is 902-880-8429, and her email is kimia@exitmetro.ca.
902-880-8429. Awesome. Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by Dan Lomas. That's LOMAS of lomasfinancial.ca.
Are you a small business owner who wants to keep more of your hard-earned profits and pay less taxes to the CRA? Do you want to plan for a comfortable and secure retirement? If your answer is yes, then you need to talk to Dan Lomas at Lomas Financial.
Dan Lomas is a financial advisor who has been helping successful entrepreneurs and business owners for over 2.5 decades. He utilizes customized solutions that can help you keep your earnings, dramatically reducing passive income tax.
Dan Lomas and his team will help you transition corporate wealth into personal wealth by utilizing customized executive pension plans. Dan will show you how to convert business wealth into personal wealth in a professional manner.
Don't let the CRA take more money than they deserve. Don't let your retirement dreams fade away. Contact Dan Lomas today and let him guide you on your path to financial success.
Visit Dan Lomas at lomasfinancial.ca or call him direct at 902-209-0855. That's 902-209-0855. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to the Afternoon Pint. I'm Matt Conrad. And who do we have here?
We have Will Burt.
Will Burt. And where are you from?
I grew up in Vancouver.
Vancouver, okay.
But I am now a Haligonian, or at least I pretend to be.
Yeah, you know what? I no matter where you're from, and if you've left your home and have chosen to make my home your home, then I take that as the ultimate compliment. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, my home is here, and I hopefully will never leave. So.
Yeah. So, and I mean, you have you work for Dalhousie, I believe.
I don't actually.
Oh, I thought I saw something because I read an article about Dalhousie. And
so I have a few affiliations beside my name. One of them is Dalhousie. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, what do you do for your day job then?
So I work for a private company.
Oh, okay.
In Dartmouth. The company is called Planetary Technologies.
Okay.
We're a small startup. There's about 15 of us on staff right now.
Okay.
But my role in the company is to lead the science team. And because I do that science largely with Dalhousie University, and I'm an alum of the university, I have adjunct status. And that is why you see it beside my name.
That's why it comes up. Yeah, because there was a couple of things that kind of popped up with Dalhousie. So I was thinking, okay, this guy has to work for Dalhousie. I figured you did research for them or something along those lines. But
research with them.
With them.
Yeah,
okay.
that's pretty critical, right? I mean, we're a for-profit company, and we work super closely with that group, but it's very much independent research that they do, and we collaborate with them.
Oh, that's awesome, though. Yeah. So why don't you explain to people who have never read an article about you what exactly that your company does?
Sure. So Planetary Technologies is doing something called marine carbon dioxide removal.
Yeah.
So there are a few companies like this that have cropped up in the last 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. And the basic idea is that there's way too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Yep.
And we know, at least we should know, that we have to stop emitting as much as we are. But there's so much there now that we also have to start actively taking some of that CO2 out of the air and storing it. So there are companies doing that in a whole heap of different ways.
Yeah, I saw something about like you can take carbon and like basically turn it into like cement or something like that.
Yep, that's one pathway. One that people often see are these like giant arrays of fans that just literally suck the CO2 out of the air, extract it into like, and shove it in the earth underground.
Yeah. I think I saw some stuff over in Iceland. They do a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we do something very similar. And our technique utilizes the oceans. I am an oceanographer by training, hence my involvement in the company. But yeah, it's a similar idea in that instead of storing carbon dioxide in the ground in rocks, the ocean is a much, much bigger reservoir of carbon than the earth and than the rock.
Is that because of the plant life that kind of feeds on the carbon?
No, I mean, it's simply because the oceans are enormous. I mean, 70% of the Earth's surface, just huge. And so there is a lot of plant life and a lot of like what we call organic carbon in the ocean, but there's also even more just dissolved CO2.
Okay.
What we call inorganic carbon. It's built up over millennia, and so it's this massive reservoir. And if we can find a way to safely store a little bit of that atmospheric CO2 in the ocean, it can make a big difference.
So if we're taking it out of the air and then put it in the ocean, like I guess the next question would be like, are we going to have a problem with the ocean? And someone's going to say, hey, there's too much CO2 in the ocean now.
Yeah, that's exactly what people would initially go to, right?
Yeah.
Well, the fact is, the oceans are actively taking CO2 out of the air naturally.
Well, that's why I thought the plant life and things like that, because I know like things like I think it's algae and other plant life and stuff like that are like natural CO2 eaters. I mean, all plant life is, but from what I understand, I'm certainly not an expert in this by any means, but my basic understanding is that the ocean does the heavy lifting. Like the plant life in the ocean does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, the oceans are the main regulator of our climate. And they are actively taking up CO2. They are becoming more acidic.
That's also what I've read, yeah.
Ocean acidification is a big problem. CO2 is actually an acid in seawater. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, what we are doing is, and this is going to get potentially quite confusing. That's
fine though, yeah.
But what you can do is sort of a double win by actually putting an alkaline material. So crushed up rock, basically. Rocks are
like chalk kind of thing. That's how people, balance out their stomach acids and stuff.
Exactly. We're talking about antacids here. You add those to the ocean, they become less acidic. And in doing that, they're actually able to absorb more CO2 from the atmosphere naturally.
Okay.
So that is the chemistry in a nutshell. You add an alkaline rock, an antacid, to the ocean. It reacts in seawater, takes up CO2, and converts it into essentially baking soda, which is what, it's dissolved in the oceans, and there's tons of it in there. And that creates almost like a vacuum where there's less CO2 gas in the water than there was before because you converted some of that to baking soda. And now the ocean actively takes up CO2 from the air to fill that void. And what you're left with at the end is an ocean that has a tiny bit more carbon in it and is actually less acidic than it was at the beginning, but only by a very small margin.
Okay.
So it's kind of this, what we consider it, and this is why a lot of scientists are studying this really actively, is because if you deployed this on a massive scale, you would end up taking a CO2 out of the atmosphere, but also in small pockets where you were deploying, you would make the ocean slightly less acidic at the same time.
Okay. So, and then obviously that would encourage more plant life, more sea life in general.
It could in certain places. Yeah. I mean, certainly in localized areas, organisms like oceans that are less acidic, calcifying organisms, oysters, mussels, and lobsters. So there is a co-benefit there that is real. But to be clear, the main goal here is not to deacidify the oceans. The main goal is to take CO2 out of the air because that is what's doing the damage right now in the climate.
And I mean, that makes total sense. But if we can also get like two birds, one stone type of thing, that's obviously a good thing. And I think the important part behind this is that, I think most people accept climate change as a real thing versus like maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there was a lot of debate. I'm not saying there's not a debate still. There's still some people that don't think it's real or, But I think that's gone. I think the argument has shifted on whether it's human impacting it or whether it's happening, but there's nothing we can do about it. I think that's more of the argument now. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that in a minute. But
sure.
I think the important part is to try to get as many people bought in. Because we obviously, however way you have to sell somebody, I'm a salesperson, so however you have to sell somebody, the end result, if we get them on board, is, I think, a win.
Sure.
So, I mean, if we're talking about helping sea life and, you saying like potentially like growth in lobsters and all, like, my mind goes to a situation where like this past lobster season was like one of the lowest we've had like ever. And therefore you're having fishermen who are like coming back with, half of what they would normally bring in. And if we're saying like, hey, this is going to help the environment, this is going to help the CO2, greenhouse gases, at the same time, it's also going to help you. I mean, maybe we'll get some buy-in from people who might not normally buy in. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is the oceans are in a bad spot right now, right? I mean, this last 12 months have been pretty scary. Ocean temperatures are spiking in the surface ocean. And so, even if, despite this idea of acidification or what have you, we need to do something about climate change.
Yeah.
The climate emergency. People need to change the way they live. We can all play our part, but there's also, Halifax right now is actually at the forefront of this technology because of what Dal's doing, because of what we're doing. It's getting kind of globally recognized. This has become sort of the R&D hub of this technology across the world.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really taking off, and people are going to start hearing more and more about it in the next year or two, I'm sure, because there's a lot of activity coming to town to study this. And so, yeah, I mean, Halifax has an opportunity to be. I mean, Halifax already is a leader in ocean tech, right?
We're right on the ocean, obviously, and there's, obviously that would make sense.
Yeah, the ocean tech industry here is huge.
Yeah.
And this is another sector that's just sort of emerging out of nowhere. And so there's a real opportunity for Halifax and Canada to be a leader in this space. And from what I've heard from some people, there's a fair bit of pride in that. Not only being a leader in technology, but also being a leader in climate solutions.
I think that's fantastic.
Sounds good, right?
I think there's going to be a lot of commerce in that in the coming decade or decades. So when people are talking about good jobs being available and all that stuff, I mean that factors into it. If all of a sudden we become the mecca of ocean technology and how to fix what we've screwed up, that's going to bring people. I mean, I know some people not be happy about bringing people here because they get a little bent out of shape about
that's also a thing. Yeah,
how many people we have coming here and how little places we have to live.
Sure.
But we still want to have a very vibrant community, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and honestly, I speak to a lot of young people in university classrooms and stuff like that. Folks want to get into the climate space. Whether it's from an environmental perspective, maybe it's from a policy or a legal or like whatever, people want to be engaged in the fight against the climate emergency. And so this isn't an avenue for that. And not just for scientists, like I say, social scientists, policymakers, whatever. People I spend 100% of my day job thinking about the climate emergency. And it's a really motivating space to be in. So let's draw in more youth. Let's draw in more people into this space, get more people thinking about it, spread the word about not just our technology, but just these ideas in general, whatever people can do, to get on board against this like pretty scary thing that's going on right now.
With, and when I think about that, then, I mean, that would almost be a fairly, going forward, it'll be almost like a recession-proof industry to be in because it's going to be an ongoing fight, it sounds like, right?
I mean, so the reason this industry exists is because about 3 years ago now, the IPCC, the folks who put out those sort of state of the climate reports, they came out and said, we need to do this on a massive scale. By 2050, this industry needs to be 2 or 3 times the size of the current oil industry.
2 or 3 of the oil industry?
That's right. You heard correctly. Like that, if this is going to be something that can actually do something.
Yeah.
In addition to the like massive cuts to emissions that we need, that's the kind of scale we're talking about.
I think that again, that goes to buy-in, because I think some of the reason why people don't want to leave fossil fuels is that fear of, I'm going to lose my job, and it's going to be it's a good paying job. So they're fearful of that. But I mean, if we just shift from one to the other, the people who are still in the industry, are in that oil industry, are going to be in there for a while, because we're not, in our lifetime, we're not going to be completely off of it. But more and more and more, and as these kids grow up, like my kid's 2.5, and I'm, maybe it might be something he might want to get involved in, because it's like, hey, you know what? Like, instead of going out west to going to the oil fields, maybe he's sticking here in Nova Scotia and doing something out in the ocean, right?
That's right. I mean, right now we are hiring multiple people to be at the operational site to run the operation. Forklift operators, industrial type jobs that I am by no means qualified to do. And so you're exactly right. Like, people can shift away from jobs that, like you say, good paying jobs in industrial sectors. Those industrial sectors could be the exact opposite of the extractive, industries that exist now. That's where it's going to have to go. If this stuff's going to be worth doing, it has to get big, or else it's just not worth it. No, that makes total sense to me. So let's we said we were going to put a little pin in the whole climate debate type of thing, but if anyone's wondering, in your opinion, how would you combat, if I was to sit here and say, I don't think climate change is my fault, I think the world goes from ice age to warming up, to ice age to warming up, ice age to warming up, and that just happens, what do you say to those people? Oh boy. It's funny. I actually went to a bachelor party a few years back where that conversation came up, and I was like, "God, are we really going to talk about this here and now?" And it was actually totally amicable and fine, but
they're interesting conversations.
Absolutely.
And I think they're good to have,
as long as folks have an open mind, right? It's all good.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're in Nova Scotia here. Everyone's awesome. That's why I love it here. But yeah, I mean, I would just say that, unfortunately, I'm just a scientist, so I go back to it's there.
I'm just a scientist.
The data is there. If you look back over 20, 30,000 years, there are cycles. Absolutely. Yeah, so that is correct. And what is also correct is that, these cycles that go, and then where we are now is like off the charts. Right. So we're not in the cycle anymore. We're on this like crazy spike above the cycle. So yes. And you know what? It's funny you say it, because the ocean actually will take care of the CO2 problem for us. This whole natural uptake thing, it's going to happen. The Earth can fix itself.
Of course.
But it's going to take...
We'll pay for it, though.
Oh, we'll be long gone. That's going to happen over millions of years. The oceans will uptake all this extra CO2. But, we're on a trajectory where we don't have time for that. And if we want to avoid the most catastrophic events, based on what we're seeing even in the last 12 months, something's got to give, right? So that's I'm not sure if that argument works, but that's where I'm coming from.
Well, I mean, coming from my perspective, I've been 12, 13 years in the insurance industry. So natural disasters are like public enemy number one at this point, whether it be hurricanes or fires and all that stuff, right? And honestly, it's like, I always talk about buy-in, about, getting behind it. It's just like, well, do you want your insurance rates to go down? Let's get these things under control. Yeah. And, maybe if there wasn't a hurricane every single season that did $2 million in damage every September, maybe your insurance rates would go down.
Oh man, it's funny you say that. Yesterday there was this big story in the New York Times about how the insurance industry in the U.S. is collapsing.
You can't buy. There's certain companies that will not sell you home insurance in Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and apparently that's spreading all over the country now.
And if you can, so I actually know, who was it? It was a guy who works for an insurance company. You know what? Actually, it was a guy, an executive in an insurance company. And he was talking about one of his best friends who has a house in Florida. And I think he said it was something like a 1,200, 1,400 square foot, 2-bedroom house. And he pays $18,000 for insurance in Florida.
Oh my God.
That's what it costs to insure a 1,400 square foot 2-bedroom home.
Yeah. Scary.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's what people are saying now. It's like, people have been saying for years, like, what's the wake up call going to be for at least folks in this part of the world where we're not like literally underwater,
right? Like
some folks are. That could be it. It could end up being insurance that wakes everybody up.
Maybe.
To be like, oh, this is actually a real problem here.
Yeah.
Whereas some of us have been like, well, you can edit this out if you want, but I met this famous climate scientist, Canadian guy, 10 years ago. He wrote a book. He was actually a BC Green Party leader at one point, I think. But anyway, he came and gave a talk. He was a climate scientist, and he wrote a book about it, about his work. And this at the lunch we had with students, one of the students said, "Oh, my dad, she was American. My dad firmly doesn't believe in climate change. I want to buy your book so I can give it to him for Christmas."
Right.
So we said, "Yeah, okay." So he gave her a free copy, and then she said, "Will you sign it for me?" So he took it and signed it in real time. He said, "What's your dad's name?" He said, "I don't know. Let's call him Phil."
Yeah.
He said, "Dear Phil, it's real. Get with the program." And he signed it and gave it to her.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's happening. It's a real thing.
Yeah, and I think people have to kind of realize, like, we built a bunch of homes next to the water because was whether from necessity, like 200, 300, 400 years ago, was necessity. Like when we landed here, we had to build homes next to it because that's how we get ships and docks and all that stuff. But then everyone also just likes. I live next to the ocean. Like literally, like I go to bed and look at the sun setting on the ocean. So when you think about the oceans rising and things like that, Nova Scotia becomes an island and half of it's gone and all this stuff, right? Yeah, it's crazy to think that could be where we're at some point. And it's my understanding, though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not really the North Pole we're concerned about. It's actually the Antarctic is that we're more concerned about when it comes to ocean rising. Because my understanding is that the North is ocean and the ice sits on it already.
Yeah.
But it's the Antarctic that has all the land and ice on top of it. And if that goes in, that's adding...
Yeah, that's right. It's the ice shelves. It's not the sea ice.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the concern around sea level rise. But I want to step back for 1 second because one thing I really don't want to do is convey like existential crisis and fear.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's a super dangerous place to be, even though it's really easy to fall into that trap because we listen to the news and we live in Nova Scotia where these things are happening to us, forest fires, hurricanes, what have you.
Yeah.
But fear is a very dangerous and powerful emotion.
Absolutely.
What I like to really talk about is hope instead, right? Like what I do every day is about hope.
Right.
It's about being creative, coming up with ways to combat this, ways to join the fight, rather than being paralyzed by fear. I think a lot of people aren't necessarily sort of anti-climate change. They're just a little bit paralyzed by like, well, what can I really do? I mean, I'm only one person. I got to live my life, and that's fair. Yeah. But there's also things that you can do actively. Right. So that's what I like to focus on instead of
I like that better
other stuff. Yeah,
I do like that better because again, it's about getting people to buy in, and you don't buy people in by scaring them.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a saying that it's better to be feared than respected, but I think that goes for like sports and coaching and things like that. So
yeah, maybe not in this case.
Maybe not in this case. But I think that's the thing is like, they have the freaking doomsday clock, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that thing is so tacky, it's just because it's like they've been moving it like, a minute by minute kind of thing, like over the decades. And it's like, okay, when's it going to get midnight kind of thing, right? And it's just, I think that's been a part of like why people just are like, you know what, you've been saying this from the 70s. And whatever, right?
Yeah. It gets a bit tiresome after a while.
It does, yeah.
So here's my idea of a clock. I raised this, I don't know, 6 months ago or something. So we have this pilot going on down on the harbor, right? It's at Tufts Cove, the power station, Nova Scotia Power.
Yep.
That is where we're piloting this technology. So we're putting alkaline materials through the cooling loop at that power plant into the ocean and measuring it like crazy.
Okay.
So we're doing it. We got the Dalhousie team is doing it for independent research. That's where all the action is. So if you go over the McDonald Bridge, starting in about mid-July, you're going to see activity down there most days, down at the power station, and that's where this is happening. So fast forward, I don't know, maybe a year from now, we're going to try and start removing carbon from the atmosphere at like 1,000 tons a year of carbon. That's the sort of thing we're talking about right now.
I mean, having that right down by Tufts Cove is probably a good idea because those smokestacks are pumping out tons of coal.
I mean, I'm watching those things every day when I'm down there, and it's daunting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of emissions coming out there. It's heating my house right now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
At least not heating it today, but it's daunting to see it. And we think about that while we're doing the operation. But that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to combat, the emissions that are coming out.
But if we can do some of these things, like, because there's other things that you can convert like carbon into in terms of like, I think, again, I remember seeing something over in Iceland where they were like heating homes with this stuff. Like, like all this stuff can equal lower power bills, lower heat bills. Like, it seems to me that that's where we could get to a point of, actually making things cheaper for people too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
unless this technology is more expensive, and then it won't. But I don't know.
Oh, I can tell you,
the scientist.
Right now, our technology is super expensive, but that's the idea, right? We have to bring those costs down.
Yeah.
But returning to this idea of a clock, so if we have, say, 1,000 tons of carbon being sucked out of the air, I want to put a clock down on the waterfront, where the really active part of the waterfront is down there, and I want to have a clock there that basically ticks up every time we verify a carbon removal from the atmosphere. The clock ticks up. So people can go down to the waterfront and then be like, hey, look over at that power station. Yes, you can see emissions coming out of the stacks because we got to heat our homes. Right. But what you're also seeing is active removal of carbon from the atmosphere. And like, this is the removal ticking up, and you can see it in real time.
Yeah.
I think people would see that and be like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even see it. It's all happening. It's ocean chemistry. It's microscopic or whatever. But it's verified by a third party. It's a real thing. We are sucking CO2 out of the air, and I think people will get excited about that.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I was like, when I watched this documentary and I saw them like sucking CO2 out of the air and like making bricks out of it, I was like, well, that's pretty badass. Right? Like, that's pretty awesome. Like, we can start paving roads with this stuff, right? So I was like pretty keen on it. And I mean, I get like, places like Iceland are small country. They can do all these things probably a lot more efficiently than they can in Canada, which we have so much land to cover, right? So, and they have so much, like, so little people. But it's my understanding, like, Iceland as a country is like net zero.
They have a lot of renewable options for sure.
But I've asked this, and you might be the perfect person to ask this, but it's like, why have we not been able to harvest the power of the tides that we have? What is going on with this thing? I know they've tried, and I know things have gotten beaten up, and it's so violent, but it's like, I don't know, go further down the line. I don't know what.
Oh, man.
There must be something we can do, because I think that thing we could power the whole province for cents on the dollar.
So it's not over.
Yeah.
I actually met a guy, a CEO of a company that's like, they're still working on it. So there's been failures for sure. When I was a grad student here 10 years ago, I was hearing a lot about that. My friends were studying it. So I would say stay tuned. I think that's coming. I think what's also happening, which is kind of interesting, right, is all this offshore wind.
Yeah. Okay.
So like one of the things that companies like, certainly what you're seeing in wind right now, is our communities going to accept this sort of thing happening where they live? So, grinding Nemo, I don't know if you remember that, right, on the bridge. That was what held back a lot of that tidal work, was that people said, you're going to grind up all the fish. Right. This is not okay. And that set them back like years.
Right.
Same goes with the offshore wind. People don't want those in their bays and their harbors. And that's, a fair point to have. But that is...
What's the problem with those? Why wouldn't people want those?
Well, I don't live in these areas, so I can't speak for it. I'm just reading the news, right? But I just think that, there's a concern of, actually, I think what it is, right, is people are concerned about fisheries.
So fisheries I can get, but I mean, like, offshore wind and stuff like that, like, is that a problem for fish? Or?
I can't speak to whether it is or it isn't, but I know that people are worried.
Okay.
Right? And so...
But worry's fine. Asking questions is fine.
Absolutely. And the question, I mean, the answer is like, it's hard to know for sure. Right. So that's the same challenge that we face too, is like, we're putting alkaline minerals into the harbor. Right. And what we're doing, there's a lot of safety checks involved with that, and we're doing a lot of independent research on it. But, there's still going to be some people who are concerned about doing things in the ocean that weren't happening previously, like putting in offshore wind, putting in underwater turbines. So these things can hold back progress in these technologies for sure. But the key in our case is that, we're trying to be super transparent. I don't know if you noticed, but we turned the harbor pink a few times last year. It was all over the news at certain times.
I didn't actually see that.
We're going to do that again this year. There'll be some news releases about it. We're trying to be as visible as possible.
You should do it next. You should do it on June 1st and 2nd. That's when they have that big sailing thing they're going through. That would be hilarious because it's it's an international sailing event, championship sailing.
I'm
thing.
super excited about it. It's going to be very cool.
It's going to be very cool. It's huge for Halifax. But if you guys could turn the whole thing pink, you'd send people away going Halifax Harbor's pink. What the hell is going on there? That'd be the gossip of the world.
We did it last year, and it just happened to be near when the Barbie movie came out.
So
that was pretty much all the press around it was
Halifax,
hey, check it out. Cool little Barbie stunt that they're doing. Obviously, it was much more about tracking ocean currents, which is a lot less exciting than,
I don't know how I missed this.
Yeah, no, it was in July and August, or August, September.
If it was August, then I was away for a good half or more of August. So,
well, stay tuned. It's going to happen again this year. And that happens just for a day because we're testing to see if we can track where the water goes when it leaves this pipe. And that really good way to do that is put a bunch of drones in the air, turn the water pink for a few hours and really track it.
And see where the dye goes, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
And so we can't see what we're doing. Typically, these things dissolve and it's just invisible.
Right.
We can track it with sensors, but it's hard. So use this dye every once in a while to get a grip on, are we tracking the currents effectively? Are we going to know where this stuff goes so that we can verify that we're removing carbon?
So how do you turn the pink? How would you turn the ocean pink?
It's not hard. You just put a little garden hose full of what we call rhodamine dye into the outlet of the pipe. And it spreads, all throughout. It wasn't super visible except quite close to the area. Okay. I went up on the bridge and took a look. It was fairly visible from there, but
yeah. And people may ask, does that do any damage? Is it harmless?
Yeah, these dyes are used a lot. Wastewater treatment uses them to understand where their plume goes. It's super common technique. So no, there's no danger to that. There's limits. There's limits to everything, right?
Of course.
So you have to stay below the limits on any sort of chemical, and we know what those are. So the fact is with dye or with our material, this stuff dilutes super quickly. In fact, it dilutes so fast that it's hard to track the signal. So in the case of this rhodamine, it's super safe, and in the case of our these alkaline materials, we believe it's pretty safe too.
Yeah, the alkaline minerals too. That's another thing I guess I was going to ask is that a finite resource that we may have to worry about at some point in time? We're hey, we're now running out of that.
Totally. We worry about that all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is a finite material. Because the important thing to keep in mind about what we're doing is that it has to be carbon negative.
Right.
Right? So everything we do, and this is a bit mind-blowing, every single thing we do on the site is tracked. Mm-hmm. If I go and grab some diesel to power the forklift, I got to track that. If I take a flight to Ottawa to go to home base, it all has to be tracked. It's all emissions, and everything we do is counted. That's all counted against us because we have to be net negative.
Right.
And so the material we use, if you have to put a bunch of CO2 in the air to generate it, it's useless.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this stuff basically has to be essentially a byproduct that is otherwise not used, and thus has a very small carbon footprint, and that material is finite.
Okay.
In response to this huge need that we have, there are all sorts of companies coming up with clever technology to generate this kind of material because they know that this is a 3 times the
next
oil.
Big thing.
Yeah, exactly. They see a market, right?
Yeah.
And so these things are coming. Right now we're using these byproducts that can get us to a certain scale. But in the future, we're going to have to use every type of what we call a feedstock that we can find that is, again, low carbon intensity because, we have a super strict accounting system and everything's got to be net negative.
I think that's good. And I think the fact that you track it and you can show your math when people ask about this, because I think that's some of the biggest lately it seems to be some of the biggest criticism of like Tesla and electric cars and things like that. They're like, well, you gotta mine those batteries.
That's right.
But I mean, I love Teslas. It has nothing. I don't have a Tesla, not yet. They're still a little bit expensive. But on top of that, I think my biggest thing about the Tesla is on a good day, you're getting 500 kilometers out of it. And which is normally fine on like a, to and from or whatever. But I don't think I could ever go to like have like 2 Teslas in my house because my wife's from Quebec. We like going on road trips and things like that. And I don't want to have to stop on a 10-hour drive to Quebec and stop for, maybe twice, probably 3 times in the winter.
Yeah.
And for like a half an hour.
Yeah.
Even the superchargers or whatever is like 20 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, I know.
So like that adds to an already long trip and all that stuff. And that's my biggest thing. But I love Teslas. I've driven one 3 times. I rented one. I test drove one. A friend of mine let me drive his, and then I rented one time. And they're incredible.
Oh, they're super cool. My boss owns one. And so I've driven around with him a lot. And man, they are fun.
Oh, and fast.
Yeah.
I mean,
scary
some people may not want that or whatever, but quite honestly, like, some of these people who, I don't know, think that's like, oh yeah, my gas engine, this is the real muscle car, and they will blow your car away. Like, I think it's the S model. It's 0 to 100 in 1.66 seconds.
Yeah.
It's insanely fast, and there's no gears.
Yeah.
It's just going.
It's just a giant computer. That's what my boss says.
It is.
It's insane.
The only moving parts is the steering wheel and the tires.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's nothing to get in the way, right? And there's a part of me that's kind of like, well, it probably is cheaper because, you never have to worry about, something breaking down, an engine, a timing belt, or nothing, none of that. None of that breaks down. If you need to get it fixed, it's like a guy freaking types something in and fixes it from afar or whatever, right?
A little bit of coding.
Yeah, right? So I think they're absolutely fascinating. I love them, but I'm not there at the point where I'm comfortable with buying one yet. But the big argument is like you have to mine everything. Now, from my understanding, listen to Elon, is that even though they're called lithium batteries, like it's mostly nickel, I believe is what it is that he says. It's only like 10% of that, and you can actually get that from the ocean. Is lithium? You can get it from the ocean.
Yeah.
So that's where I was kind of going with this. Actually, is like, do you think that like ocean, like could we be, instead of digging holes in the ground, we may be extracting the lithium for the batteries?
Oh man,
from the ocean.
I mean, that's a whole other beast, right? Talk about a can of worms. Deep ocean mining is a thing and could become an even bigger thing. I don't know where to take that exactly, but what I do know is that the oceans they're chocked full of metals, full of all sorts of things that people don't realize. Like, as I'm a marine chemist, right? And
wasn't it like we've only like explored something like 5% of the ocean, like something like that? I
mean, that's returning back to what I said about it being the ultimate reservoir.
Right.
Like, it's the average ocean depth is 4 kilometers.
Yeah.
So that's the average. And so you go out on the high seas and there's 4 kilometers of water beneath you.
Right.
It's a long way. Yeah. And anyway, so it's that is why folks are getting excited about storing excess carbon in the ocean. There's 50 times more carbon in the ocean than there is in the atmosphere. And so the analogy I use is that's like a 3/4 full jug of milk versus a full bathtub.
Okay.
So let's pour some of that milk jug out into the bathtub, just to like a small amount. And we don't want to take all the CO2 out of the air.
Right.
Just like,
well, you need some for plants.
We need some. Yeah. So just a small amount needs to come out of that milk jug. And if you pour that into your full bathtub, you're not going to see a notable change in your bathtub. Your bathtub's going to look exactly the same as it did before. So let's use this massive reservoir. Let's allow the oceans to naturally take up CO2, accelerate that a little bit. And from what the sort of scaling arguments that people make, it could get huge if we can do it right. Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So with you guys being a for-profit, do you guys seek like government help at all in those types of things, or is that the help that you get kind of from Dalhousie? Or
So we're for sure going to need government help.
Yeah.
We're speaking to, all levels of government now,
Right.
because this idea of like carbon credits, that needs to be a regulated market. It isn't right now in this sort of like new industry that I'm existing in, but one of the ultimate goals we have is to be in sort of a regulated market that governments can be involved in, because Canada has a pretty lousy track record for sort of per capita emissions. And
yes, and you know what? That's a really interesting point, because the numbers come out, and you know how you're a scientist, so you know how numbers are. I'm not a scientist, but I see numbers, and I like numbers, and I like stats. But I have there's a comedian who's one of my favorites, and he says I hate stats. He's like, because people will go, they'll have their own opinion, and they'll go to their imright.com website, and they'll throw it a stat and say like, see, look, and it's like, the example was, do you know that like 90% of shark attacks happen in shallow waters? He's like, yeah, that's because that's where 90% of the people are. So it's, what I find interesting about stats is like people look at like the carbon emissions and they go like, Canada, it's 1.5% of the entire world.
right.
And they think we're dropping the bucket.
Yeah.
Why do you care about us? And to a degree, they're right. What can Canada do to shift that? Probably not a lot.
Sure.
Outside of the fact that we can heavily benefit from it and be the leaders, and then have everyone else give us their money.
That's
so
right.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
So that part we should be on board with. But it's more looking at like the per person, the per capita.
Totally.
And for some reason, I think I know why, but we per person pollute more, have a larger carbon footprint.
Yeah.
I think it's because we have such a large country and people are driving more or something. I don't know. Maybe you know more about it. But
I'm not an expert. We do drive a lot. It's also really cold here.
Also that too. So there is that.
So like I was underneath the stacks at the power station, and when it was cold as hell at the end of our field trial, like those stacks are roaring.
Yeah,
Because my house is using power, your house is using power.
Yeah.
So
I'm 100% electric.
yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. And for the record, those stacks, natural gas now mostly, thank God, it's not coal anymore.
Oh, it's not? Okay. I thought it was still
not there. Not there.
Okay.
But still, I mean, yeah, our homes aren't very efficient, and
Right.
we and it's damn cold
Yeah.
for a lot of the year. So I think that's largely what we have working against us. But yeah, we can. I think if we do this right, and like I say, if Halifax is a leader in this space, if it's like I say, if it's going to be important, it's going to get really huge. So it can take off all across the world. Like there's a lot of ocean to go around, and a lot of space for this to be deployed. And so, yeah, we as Canada can't do everything, but if we build technologies and prove them out and make them low cost enough, then the whole world can take those technologies and run with them. And Halifax, if this gets huge, this is going to be recognized as the place where it all started. Cool. And I'm going to be that'd be a pretty cool thing.
It would be a very cool thing to, be a part of. You more than me, like you're the one who's actually doing the work. I'm just like saying, yay, Halifax, So, I mean, that's very cool. The other thing is like, I don't want to get political about it, but like, carbon tax, obviously. Mm-hmm. Actually, you know what, before I even get into that, if hearing you you're kind of confirming a little bit what I'm thinking is like, we need your work in order to reduce. I don't know if we can do anything more to reduce what I do on a day-to-day basis necessarily to reduce my carbon footprint outside of, I guess we can put up solar panels and things like that. But, because we represent so little and because we have to heat our homes and because we have to drive in a big country and all those things, I don't know if we can reduce it. That's where you come in and your work comes in. It sounds like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong.
So, yeah, I would be very careful there, right? Because one of the arguments against what we do is that we create a scapegoat mentality for emissions reduction.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right. So folks have actually come to me and said like, well, if your technology takes over, it's just another reason why people don't need to reduce we don't need to reduce and industries can keep emitting. And that's actually a fair it's a fair point. The counter argument is that we have to do both. So what we're doing is going to represent, even at the most extreme scales that I was talking about before, whatever, 3 times the oil industry, all that jazz, that's going to be like 10% of what needs to happen. The other 90% needs to be emissions reduction. And so that maybe you personally aren't going to have a say in that, but the government can come down hard and say, this is the new way things have to be. We're actually going to stick to our emissions targets, most of which countries make and then they don't follow up on.
Right.
The bottom line is we have to do both. So our technology can help, and it's definitely something we need, but if it isn't done alongside super drastic emissions reduction, it's not going to have an impact.
And I when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like, hey, let's just keep going status quo. I mostly mean like, Matt Conrad and all the other people like him may not be able to do it, other than when Teslas start having longer ranges, I'll buy a Tesla. And
sure.
There's no gas there, and that would naturally immediately reduce my carbon footprint. Things like that, like, adding certain things. But it's like, I sit there and I think like, sure, my wife and I will go on the weekends, we'll go for a drive, but for the most part, like, Monday to Friday, it's to work, back to work. I do this podcast. It's generally nearby.
Sure.
Like it's, we generally find a place that it's like, we're not driving home and then driving back. Like, I don't feel like I drive that much.
Sure.
So I'm sitting there and I'm just trying to think like, what can I do to reduce that? And I that's the part I guess I struggle with a little bit, is like, outside of, yes, mass companies need to reduce what they're doing. I don't know how we'll ever get to a point. I mean, I'm sure at some point we will, but like planes and things like that, like that needs to eventually happen, right? Mm-hmm. Vehicles will be a huge thing, obviously, if every vehicle is electric. But there's a lot of there's so many moving pieces that have to happen there. Totally. As I talk it out, right? Like,
well, there's a reason why nothing's happened, right? In the last 40 odd years, we've been super unsuccessful actually implementing any change, because it's a super complex problem. And I don't know. I don't think people should, and this is just personal opinion, I think people should do what they can. But it's up to the government, and it's up to governments to come down and with strict regulations on industry, strict regulations on maybe flights are going to become super expensive so that we don't use them as much. I don't know. But the fact is, like, we can't hold the day-to-day person responsible for emissions reduction. It has to happen from the top down.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Do elections scare you guys?
Oh, yeah.
That's where I was going to be. I mean, like, jury's out for the carbon tax for me. Reason why it's out is not because I don't think we should do anything. But, we had a system in place before, cap and trade, and it seemed like it was working. Then it was canceled because we were going to increase it a little bit, which would have caused a little bit of an offset. From my understanding, it would have been like a 1 to 3% increase, versus now, when we lost our cap and trade here in Nova Scotia, we were forced to have the carbon tax, which made it something like a 23% increase on fuel and all that other stuff. So I'm kind of like, I don't know if I believe in necessarily the carbon tax, and I know everyone hates it. So I'm not completely like that person that's like,
you're not ready to axe it right here and now.
But I think we can do something different. I think there could be something else that's negotiated. It seemed before like the cap and trade that we had in there was good before and was accepted before, and now it's not.
Sure.
And I can get into a political discussion of why, but I don't want to.
That's good, because I have almost nothing to say about it.
Fair enough. But I just, it seems to be a really big thing, and I honestly think that the axe the tax / carbon tax is going to be the biggest election factor coming up in the next year or whatever when we have the election. So it's intense to think that I would be. It just, and recently, Jane Goodall, who was like the climate grandmother, came out speaking against it lately, which I thought was really bizarre.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, all I can say is So I don't follow the news super closely. Now I used to be an academic, so things move pretty slowly. I had my research questions, I answer some cool things about the ocean, study them. Yeah. Now I work in a startup, and it's like I think about things like day to day, week to week.
Right.
So our company, we're going at lightning speed, and we have to get things done super quick. And so it's like, yes, I worry about the election like in my spare time, but when it comes to like the company, we are way too focused on like the objective at hand to think beyond into this like wider scape of things like elections and stuff like that. Like we got to get our own stuff done, build out our technology, bring down costs, all that kind of stuff. So that's the world I live in. It's like this super focused hyperspeed world, which is super intense, but also super fun.
I just hope that your work isn't negatively impacted by an election that is triggered due to this axe the tax mentality, right? Because that's the last thing. Like, I think if anything, this whole like we collect money and then give it back to you thing, like, it just seems I'd rather just see taxes invested in green energy, in renewable energy, green energy, how to fix the problem, instead of this like give us some of your money and then 3 months later we'll give it back, right? Like,
it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if there are significant changes afoot, like what that will mean for things like green energy and technology. It's tough to say. Yeah.
Well, if I'd say we wrap this up because we're hit 50 minutes.
Okay.
But I'll give you the last word. If there's anything that you think people need to know, lay it on me.
Perfect. So there is something people need to know, and that is that we are doing this field trial this summer. So starting in mid to late July, down at Tufts Cove, there's going to be alkaline minerals going in the ocean. There's going to be boats. There's going to be moorings. There's going to be lots of sensors. We're going to be studying the heck out of this, and that's going to be ongoing all through the summer and fall. So if folks want to get involved in some way, if they have questions about it, if they want to know more about the science, more about the ecology, you can go to our website, planetarytech.com. You can reach out to me. I'm here in Halifax all the time. I give public seminars. You can see them online. We want to make sure that folks are aware of what we're doing, and that they don't have big questions about it that go unanswered. So that is sort of the key thing for me, is that that folks are aware and that they know we're here to answer questions whenever they have them.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll get all that information too. Like when we put this post up, or when we put and we'll put all the website and all that stuff in there, so people know where to go. But I mean, I'm really excited about your work. Honestly, I think it's pretty interesting stuff. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I try to understand this stuff as much as possible, and I love the idea of Halifax being the leader at anything. So that's awesome too. One thing I should say before we go, we were here at the Oxford Tap Room. They're always very good to us recording here. So Garrison, Oxford Tap Room. I had the Hold Fast, which is actually pretty nice beer. If you're in between, if you're like, I want a little bit more than a pale ale, but not quite an IPA, that's a great beer for it. You had probably what my actual favorite beer is from Garrison.
So good.
Yeah, the Juicy. Like, bang for your buck, 8%.
That's it.
It's a doozy, but so much flavor. So, definitely check Garrison out. The Oxford Tap Room, as you said, the weather's for it right now. That back patio's top notch. And good point, yeah. Apparently they were doing Taco Tuesdays too for $10, and it looks pretty good. They get a couple options there, so that's pretty good.
Yep.
So that being said, cheers. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain what you do, and I think this will be a good episode that people will find quite interesting. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much.